Hey guys, it's Jolene from Smith's Nature Friendly Farms. We are hanging out in the garden today, and I think it's been a while since we've done a garden tour, so I'm going to take you on a garden tour today. All right, it has been a really good growing season this year. I don't think we did a garden tour last year because the growing season was so terrible. It rained so much, we lost so many plants. We replanted, if I recall, probably at least 3 times last year. Last year was really rough for the garden. But this year we're having a really good growing season. It is very hot and it got very hot very quick, so that certainly has had some impacts. But overall the garden is doing quite well, so I'm excited to show you some things that are going on out there. Now I'm going to take you through a bunch of different things along the way. I'm going to tell you a couple of things that I found worked really well for me this season. I'm also going to highlight a couple of the projects that we did. We're going to tell you about the single seed challenge and my update. I'm also going to show you how the laundry basket test went, and we'll go through a couple of things along the way that I've learned that seem to do super well for me in making good garden practices. So we'll talk through those as we go along. For those of you that don't know us or haven't followed us for long, this is a garden that is about 4 years old. I moved here originally from Canada down into Mississippi and have been learning to garden in this very hot and different climate, and it's been such a fun time. Now, this is a no-till garden, so we don't till the soil. It's just we add compost onto the top, and it is by far my favorite garden. We do have a tilled section that we do each year, and each year I do it, I ask myself, why am I doing this? It just gets taken over by weeds. It's super hard to maintain and doesn't flourish. So my no-till garden is definitely my happy and most productive gardening space. Now, if you're expecting to see a weedless garden, as some people claim no-till can be, it's not weedless, and I'm certainly not a weedless gardener. There are weeds in my garden for sure. I spend a lot of time weeding, but they are definitely far less in a no-till garden. The plants can't even outgrow the weeds in a tilled garden here in the south. It's unbelievable how quick they grow. You have to have tools and time and a lot of things, and I don't have all of those things. I am one person. I manage a farmer's market plus do social media marketing along the way, so I don't have a ton of time, so I'm trying to manage my garden at the same time. So weeds to me are definitely an ongoing challenge. You will not see this being a weed-free garden by any means. So this has been the year of the zucchini. Oh my goodness, I've had more zucchinis than I can ever imagine. They've had unbelievable production, and none of this is fed with chemicals. So this is all sheep gold that I use, so sheep manure, and squash love sheep manure. Like, they just do amazing, and I can't leave them maybe 24 hours and there's another giant one. They just seem to just take right over with squash. Like, I could have been that person walking down the street leaving squash in everybody's door. This section of the garden, we have just started developing and kind of getting a vision for landscape. I've gardened this section a couple of different ways over the last 3 years, but I've landed on something that I really like, that has a little bit of prettiness to it, but also very functional. So you can see I've added some mulch in here. We are adding mulch to keep down the weeds. And then I'm building, these are actually old drawers, and we turn them into boxes, and the larger garden bed box there as well. So this is kind of my raised bed, my wooden box section, and I love the look of a wooden box in the garden with the bark mulch, and it's really nice. So this section in here right next to my raised bed bark mulch area is an area where we actually just keep adding compost to it. This actually worked out really well this year because it was a really dry season. Normally this is actually a bit of a wet spot, and I keep adding the compost hoping to raise it a bit and become a little less of a wet spot. But this year it paid off because it needed the moisture, and it helped these squash really thrive, along with, of course, the compost. It is absolutely full of butternuts throughout, hidden in the leaves. So we are going to have a tremendous butternut squash haul. Butternut's amazing because of the flavor, but they also store really well. So if you're looking for a vegetable that gets you out into the winter a bit longer, like, you can get probably at least 3 months off of them. In fact, it's not until 3 months that they start to sweeten, like truly reach their peak of sweetening. So you probably get about 6 months out of them. And you can see here that the spaghetti squash is also in amongst them. There's all kinds of different squash in there. Some I don't even know what they are. But this spaghetti squash is starting to crawl out, and that's a nice, healthy size spaghetti squash. We'll make a pasta recipe with it where I put hamburger and cheese and tomato sauce on the inside of it and bake it. Oh, so delicious. So we're not hiding anything here. This is an area under development. This plastic here is basically a pathway through the garden, but also a major pathway for water. It has a little river that runs through it when it rains. So it's not an easy thing to figure out how I'm going to keep this pathway from being, basically weeds. By all means, if any of you guys have ideas, put them in the comments down below. But right now, what I'm kind of thinking of is I'm going to dig it out a bit and then put in some gravel. Hopefully that'll make the weeds easy enough to pick off. Bark mulch won't work. Bark mulch tends to flow with the water and get pushed into other areas of the garden, so that won't necessarily work here. But we do want something. I do walk down here a fair bit, and I want to keep a nice pretty pathway in here, so that's to be determined. This giant guy is an Amish Pie Squash. I've never grown it before. It's lovely. I'm so excited about it. Apparently it's a good edible squash. We've got a couple of them growing, and they'll likely get sold at a farmer's market, or I might eat one. We'll see. I'm not a big pumpkin flavored kind of person, but unless it's in a latte spiced. But other than that, I don't eat a lot of pumpkin. Now this is our pool garden. This one has kind of a bit of a funny story, how it came to fruition, but essentially we buy pools for our ducks. Over time they wear out and I need a new pool, and then I recycle them in the garden. And we bought some on sale last year thinking in advance, and we ended up buying the wrong ones. They're too big and the ducks won't use them. So I ended up with a lot of pools. So I cut out the bottoms of them and used them as raised beds. And at first I looked at them and thought, they're kind of ugly, but they're not so bad. And it became the blue garden. That's kind of our theme here, hence the blue chair. The red bins we're going to be moving, but overall this is the blue garden. So I'm looking for all kinds of fun blue ideas to add to the blue garden. So in this bin, we actually have a ton of melons. I'm so excited about the melons. They're just beautiful. You can see I don't really follow the guidelines for spacing. There's a lot of gardening guidelines I don't follow. That's just who I am. I don't really believe in garden rules. I feel like everything it should be tested, and don't believe everything you read unless you've tested it yourself, because there are so many things that get caught up in old ways that people say you should do, that there are actually new ways to try things and they actually work, and don't get caught up in them. So I will overload this garden and often many spots in my garden and do just fine. Now, I'm not saying that always works. It also can have problems too. So by all means, do what's best for you. But I overload my garden mainly because I seed way too much and then don't have homes for everything. I've planted herbs in different spots within the garden. This one is the borage, and it doesn't actually look overly healthy. It's actually pretty light green, despite the fact that I think the soil is pretty high in nitrogen. But I planted it because it has blue flowers and it's in a blue garden. So I'm going to try, I think, seeing if I can perk it up with some organic fertilizers. I use the AgroThrive in the bucket and the containers. Within the garden, we have used no pesticides and no fungicides whatsoever. We are super big bee fans and will do anything to protect the bees within our garden, and the bugs overall, like all bugs matter. So we don't mind, you know, we know that we're going to share some of our plants with the bug world. I do find year over year, as the bird volume grows, because the bird volume in our yard is growing, and I believe it's because they're seeing our yard as a food source. So we've had a lot of nesting birds in the last 2 years, a huge number of them returning, which has been great. I think they eat a lot of our bugs, and it doesn't seem to be a major problem. I'm not saying we don't have fruit that gets eaten on by bugs, it definitely happens, but it's not wiping out the garden per se. Now, for fertilizers, we only tend to use fertilizers on the containers because they're so hungry and thirsty and dry up so fast, and you're washing the nutrients away. I don't use hardly any fertilizers at all, no chemical fertilizers. Everything's an organic fertilizers. I have a video on the fertilizers we tested. That's what I'm using this year, which is an AgroThrive liquid fertilizer. On occasion, I have a pelleted version of it as well, I can't remember it off the top of my head. It's in that video though, where we test the different fertilizers, and I might toss a little bit of that down early in the season, but really honestly I'm relying heavily on the compost. This is our turmeric. I actually thought this wasn't coming back. I planted it last year in the fall and it never popped up this spring, so I thought for sure we weren't going to see any turmeric, and all of a sudden about 7 days, 8 days maybe into June, it just started to appear, and I was so excited. So I planted other stuff in here thinking they weren't coming back, and now they're growing up in between. It'll be fine. One of my garden buddies. Okay, here's an update. This is the laundry basket test that we did for the tomato plants. Now, we planted tomato plants all throughout in here. Honestly, it did not work. It was not a success. I'm not saying it won't work in general, but it did not work for us this season. We got mighty hot, mighty fast, and it could not keep up with the heat. You could not keep this moist enough. It might be really interesting to try with lettuce in the fall. I think there might be some testing there we can do. It's not that it won't work. I'm pretty sure it's just the heat that made it just too much. Or if you grew something in the shade, maybe it might be a bit better. But overall, the project failed for its success rate. It wasn't completely a total failure, but we'll just say a partial failure, and let's try it again and see how we can modify. Now, peppers have absolutely loved our garden this year. This is, I believe, a Hungarian pepper. And it's exciting because what I do is I actually take them, I dry them, and then I turn them into my own homemade paprika. So I really, really like making my own herbs and spices. Then you don't have to buy them, and then you can put up lots of them. It's a good year for cucumbers this season in the no-till garden. You can see here, I still weeds. This is one of my top least favorite weeds. I believe we call it grape weed. You see the little ball at the bottom? It's usually just absolutely full of them, and it drops and makes 100 more wherever they land. Not a fun weed. Easy to pull, but annoying. Now, I have enjoyed, and I always enjoy, cucumbers. Cucumbers are my favorite thing to grow and eat in the summertime. If I could have these year-round, I'd be just thrilled. We have a beautiful black pepper on the grow here. These have been really nice. These are gorgeous peppers, thick and strong and beautiful in color, and man, do they get attention when people see them at the market. So these black peppers have been great. I think they were called Black Beauty. When we moved into the property, there was this big metal barrel thing sitting in the yard, so I dragged it out into the middle of the garden, put some soil in it, and it has become a container for the centerpiece of the garden. And do I ever love it? This is a sweet potato vine. I think I managed to actually keep that sweet potato vine alive throughout the year in the house, so I haven't had to buy it again. These are some gorgeous zinnias, and red is one of my favorite colors, so just love the zinnias. And this is some anise. It's anise hyssop. It's really, really popular with the pollinators. So it's great to have on hand. I know I often see my hummingbirds over here taking a little test of the flowers. The tomato plants have struggled a bit this season. I think it's just been really, really too hot too quick. I've definitely had a lot of tomatoes, so I'm not complaining, but they should be producing way longer into the season, and they're already dying off in little bits. So not my best year for tomatoes, not my worst either though. The container growing has been interesting this year. So in previous years, we moved to a lot more container growing because we got so much moisture, and the containers allowed us to control the moisture a bit better. They dry out a lot faster. But this year has been the opposite of last year, and it has just been so dry and so hot that the containers are too hot for a lot of plants. So in the shade, they are doing beautifully well. These are some squash plants, and then my rosemary over here. Out in the sun, they're not doing badly, but they definitely don't look quite as healthy as the other ones. Like this cucumber looks really pale, and it's been getting quite a bit of fertilizer. I fertilize it every week. So I still love my containers, but I think this area really needs a shade cloth over it, and I think everything would flourish a lot better if it had some shade. You can see the banana tree is taking over. I'm going to have to try and take some of this guy back. He's never given me an edible banana, but it sure looks pretty. That's one of our birds up there that returns every year. He sits up there and chatters at me. His sound is quite neat. Now our eggplants in the container have done well. They're growing just great. Lots of eggplants coming in. Some things in the containers do really well, and some things not so much. I found that cucumbers don't do overly well in the containers. Asparagus does fantastic in the containers, and I like it because it's easy to keep it weed free, so that's a good one for the containers. But overall, cucumbers I think is the main one that hasn't done well. We did a pruning video on our muscadine, so I thought I'd show you guys our muscadines coming in. These are all the gorgeous muscadines that we will soon have come to fruition, and you can see all the flowers that popped up, black-eyed Susans in between, that I just leave and let go until they seed, and then I'll move their seed into other areas of the garden. This is our pineapple plant. This, I think, is its third year of growing, and I'm really excited. Like, some point I should get a pineapple unless I'm doing something wrong. I'm really excited about it. Like, it's huge, it's mammoth, but no pineapple yet. So this was grown from a pineapple top from a grocery store, so it'll be interesting to see what comes to fruition here. And this is our garden grown ginger. This has come back. This is its second year in a row. You can see the root down in here, along with little weedies. And this was grown just from some Walmart ginger that was on the counter and needed to get planted. And we do have a video on that if you want to learn more about it. But overall, it's super simple. Just needs really fast draining soil and does really well in Mississippi. Right, let's talk through a couple of things that I found this season that have really helped me with the garden. 2 habits that honestly have made things a lot better this season. The first thing is so simple, but I have had buckets everywhere, and I leave them just so that when I'm coming out and I'm picking a vegetable, the weeds that are there, I'm picking as I see them, and there is a bucket close by and a place to put them. It helps prevent any weeds from re-rooting, because often I'll toss them on the black plastic, which they'll actually root again, and especially if there's moisture on it. And it helps just make sure I keep it collected, and it's making me weed even more because I like filling the buckets. Yes, I'm weird about, I like to see things done. So when I'm seeing an area that needs weeding, I'm just quickly getting in there, pulling it in, putting it into my bucket. So it's really helping that habit. So the more buckets you can have laying around your yard, you may not love the look of a bucket all around, but if you're not trying to impress anybody, the functionality of it is great. Now the other thing that I'm doing is something that I actually saw on somebody else's YouTube channel, and I wish I knew who it was. I'd give them credit for it, but it was something that I just randomly saw and didn't think at the time it was going to stick, and it did. But it was to spend just 15 minutes a day in the garden, weeding or doing some tasks in the garden, and just make sure you get out there for 15 minutes. So what happens is 15 minutes tends to turn into 2 hours, and you get a lot more work done in the garden. So it's so hot in the south that as I'm filming this video, my phone shuts down and says, it is too hot. You need to cool off before you can use your phone. So we're having to do this in 2 parts. So the fritillary butterflies have come out. This is the first one I've seen so far this summer, and they will take over in the next month. They're one of my favorite butterflies because they're quite tolerant of me and my camera, whereas a lot of butterflies will feel your shade and flutter off. These guys are they're a bit friendlier. They love the zinnias. Okay, for our next update, this is on our single seed challenge. So for those of you guys that watched our video that we had decided we were going to take one seed and baby it. And we did that. We babied this guy. But babying doesn't seem to work for me. I don't win. So I planted it. It's a melon that I wanted to keep the seed from because I don't have any more seed and I can't find it anymore. It is still growing. The vine is here. The duck got into the first melon that came to fruition, and it's still flowering, so there's still some possibility it's not completely gone. And in fact, I do have one melon that I've propped up inside a weed bucket to keep the duck out of. So it's still going. It's struggling. It feels like, well, it's funny. It doesn't look like it's struggling that bad. The leaves are really good. It's rather healthy. But we'll see. It might have been a single seed failure. We'll keep you posted. And I did want to highlight a couple of potted plants that are up by the house that are interesting. These are experiments as well. This big tall one is actually a Tamarillo. Not a Tomatillo, but a Tamarillo. It does have a tomato-like fruit to it. It's supposed to be like a cherry tomato, but bitter, not bitter, but citrusy bitter. So it's supposed to be good in smoothies. And this is a plant that comes back, or it's just a dwarf tree, I guess, in a sense. Oh, I see I've got little flowers forming on the front. So I'm excited about this one. This one was really easy to grow, and I think I got the seed from Baker's Creek. And then I've got some experimental rhubarb plants, and I'm really excited about these. So rhubarb has a lot of difficulty in the south. The heat tends to wipe it out. In the north, it grows like a weed. In the south, it dies. So these are actually 2 different varieties. One's from Colorado and one is from Australia. They were gifted to me by my friends at the Great Mississippi Tea Company. Fantastic people. Please visit their website if you haven't seen them. They are growing tea in the US, and they are a great small business that I truly support. And I also do social media for, so there is some bias there. But anyways, these guys gave me these 2 plants because they knew that I was desperate to have a taste of back home. I love rhubarb. So we're trialing these guys out to see how they do in the south. A couple of other interesting babies. I know a lot of you are asking about the moringa, dwarf moringa. This is my moringa that we started. It's got a little bit of yellowing going on. Pretty sure that's because of overwatering. I'm not a huge fan of yellowing as an illness because it can be too much water, not enough water, and not enough nutrients. So it can be hard to tell which it is, but I'm putting my money on too much water. I do tend to overdo the water because I think it's so hot in the south. And this one's actually a drought tolerant plant, so it really does not need as much water as I'm giving it, I'm sure. And this is a miracle berry plant. It's got some leaf issues going on that I need to try and figure out. New leaves have been healthy, but older leaves seem to be dying off. I don't know if that's just normal or not. But I'm really excited about this guy because a miracle berry will take something that is sour and turn the flavor sweet. I'm excited to test that one out. So all in all, this year's garden I am very, very happy with. We have taken out tons of cucumbers. We are going to have an immense amount of squash. We're going to have sweet potatoes and a ton of other great veggies come out of this. We've enough zucchini to feed an army. So I am super pleased. No-till gardens for me are definitely the way to go. I'm not saying tilled is not a way to go. If that's your style, that's your style. But this is my style and I'm absolutely loving it this season. All right guys, well that's my garden tour for today. I better head back in the house because it's starting to heat up for the afternoon and pretty sure my phone's going to give me that too hot message all over again. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, they're certainly welcome down in the comments. And thank you as always for being here. Be friendly, be kind.